The first question is, why the NTA? This is a question that we've answered over and over again, but it requires restating. The point of the matter is that we're in a crisis. The point of the matter is that we're at a precipice. The point of the matter is that we are, just like in 2017, at another point where there can be an implosion in the form of another military coup, an implosion in the form of a civil war, of armed conflict. So the NTA offers us an opportunity of creating a soft landing for our country. The NTA offers an opportunity of genuine The last 43 years, some would argue, the last 60 years have been a period of arrested transition. Some would argue that the liberation movement and independence was an incomplete process that arrested a transition and remained us in the same vortex and in the same traps that we were in since 1888 when the Rat concession was executed. The only thing is that faces have changed, and which is why it's so fashionable these days to hear young people say Ian Smith was better than. It is a reflection of that incomplete transition or of that arrested transition. But there's a genuine transition that is taking place in Zimbabwe. There's a genuine transition that has to be managed. There's a genuine transition that has to be shepherded. There's a genuine transition that has to be scaffolded. If it's not scaffolded, and it's bigger than Zanu PF, it's bigger than the military. If it's not scaffolded and shepherded, we are going to go to Armageddon. We're going to go to an implosion. What exactly do I mean by that? It is my submission that Zimbabwe has operated on the basis of 6, 7, or 8 or so pillars of a consensus, a liberation consensus. But that consensus has reached its limits. We are genuinely transiting from it. And because we're genuinely transiting with it, it needs to be shepherded. What are those four corners of that transition that has kept Zimbabwe as it is, as we know it today? The first one has been the liberation polity and the liberation generation. Takarwa Wondo, we fought in the war. These are our values. This is our system. And the liberation project has arrested this country, has been holding this country in its full grip, literally and metaphorically, from 1980, and operating on the culture of impunity, the doctrine of entitlement, and ensuring that no one comes close to it. B, we've been operating on the basis of a consensus anchored around a securocratic state and electoral authoritarianism, the ritual of an election that is scaffolded by the military and a securocratic state. We go to elections, but the outcome is predetermined. Since 1938, we've had 12 elections whose outcome has been contested, but whose outcome has been actualized. The third pillar of the consensus has been patronage. Patronage has been dished out in the form of land, of companies, of mining concessions, of procurement contracts, of post jobs in the public service, ambassadorships, and so forth. This patronage, to a very large extent, has been evenly distributed amongst the elite of Zimbabwe, not the ordinary Wananji, not the ordinary peasants. Number D, we have had a policy and a polity pillared on capture and total emasculation of state institutions. There is no institution in Zimbabwe that is independent. There is no institution in Zimbabwe that is not an extension of Zanu PF's Politburo. Whether it's the Chapter 13 institutions of the Constitution, your Human Rights Commission, your Anti-Corruption Commission, they are all extensions of the ruling party. They are all elections, extensions of Zanu PF. And I want to argue here that every institution, including those that I can mention because I'm a practicing lawyer, every institution in Zimbabwe has been captured and captured thoroughly. Another pillar which has kept Zanu PF surviving is poverty and ignorance. And a mismanaged economy has guaranteed a population that has no agent, a population that has no agent, a population that is not capable of fighting back. A next pillar has been the existence of a credible, even if small, alternative voice in the form of unions, in the form of an opposition party, MDC. That consensus, that there are little voices who speak out and moderate and present some form of checks and balance has existed in the last 40 years or so. And then finally, we've had a Westphalian or world order with a common definition of internationalism, the rule of law, and human rights. But these things are now gone. All of these above are now gone. First, what has challenged the old consensus is the demographic factor and natural attrition. The liberation generation is gone. It's hanging on. It's in its late 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And it's quite clear that if the next president is a war veteran, the one after that will never be a war veteran, just by age alone, not by election. So this means that we're actually in a genuine transition, a demographic transition, which needs to be managed. Connected to that is the demographic curve. 69% of the population is below the age of 35. And this is a population that is rapidly expanding. The current population of Zimbabwe right now is 15 million. By 2050, this population would have doubled. Yet we are not producing the 2 million jobs that are required to be created per year in order to meet their demands by the year 2050. So an implosion is coming. A demographic transition is taking place, which needs to be managed. A third thing which is critical, which is threatening, threatening the old consensus is the vacuum being created by the departure of the liberation generation, being filled by the rise of a parasitic comprado elite that has no social base at all, that has no shame, that has no elasticity, and that has conflicted itself with the state palace and the state house. Some of them, as Sekuru Ibo said, some of them are being fast-tracked to the presidia. The next president of Zimbabwe could be Kudakwache, and that's a total disaster. The rise of this blank, totally vacuous comprado elite that is so proximate to the seat of power. Another factor is the economic mismanagement. Another factor is the deindustrialization and the brain drain. Another factor that has threatened the consensus is, of course, the 2030 agenda. So the sum collection of all these factors, is that we have a crisis that needs to be managed. We have a crisis that needs to be managed to avoid an implosion. That's where the NTA comes in. The NTA is basically an idea that is anchored on dialogue. The citizens of Zimbabwe, the Wananchi of Zimbabwe, must talk and dialogue, which is why the first process quite clearly has to be the national conference or the national convention. The national convention must be attended by every Zimbabwean. But of course, 15 million people cannot attend to that. That means there must be representative organizations of the many and varied constituencies in Zimbabwe, starting with the change, labor, and what remains of it, the unemployed, the youth, women, war veterans, the academia, the professionals, the students, and the conference or convention must articulate issues that speaks to Zimbabwe's fragility and vulnerability. Issues that speak to Zimbabwe's fragility and vulnerability. And those issues must be put on the table, including, number one, the issue of nationhood. What does it mean to be a Zimbabwean? What is a Zimbabwean? The issue of an inclusive vision. What is the Zimbabwe we want? What is the Zimbabwe we expect? The issue of the integrity of Zimbabwe as a nation state. The issue of devolution and decentralization must be on the table. The issue of transitional justice must be on the table. But these are nation-building matrices. Before we go to the economy and the whatever, we must address those things that go to the root of Zimbabwe as a nation state. So nationhood demands identity. What does it mean for a Bocha, a Kalanga to be a Zimbabwean, and Ndebele to be a Zimbabwean, a Korekore to be a Zimbabwean? What is the vision? What is the mission of Zimbabwe? The issue of transitional justice is important, not because we want to be arrested by the review mirror, but a look at the review mirror will make us avoid the potholes of the past in order to liberate a new Zimbabwe. So these issues, these structural issues, these foundational issues, these base issues must be discussed before we go to superstructural issues. Superstructural issues include transitional issues, include long-term issues. So the issue of the economy is key. The issue of collapsed infrastructure is key. The issue of modernization is key, including the burning issue of the environment, the burning issue of artificial intelligence. The issue of a developmental agenda is key. What developmental trajectory are we going to embark on is key. The issue of ending Zimbabwe's isolation and total integration is key. It must be at the table of the national convention. The issue of infrastructure, gross capital formation is key. The issue of the National Democratic Revolution is key. It must be discussed at the National Transitional Authority. There mustn't be a subject that is taboo. There mustn't be a subject that is superior to the other. So in some quarters, the issue of isolation and sanctions will be paramount. In some quarters, the issue of human rights, rule of law, and constitutionalism will be paramount. The idea is to reconcile the debate and bring everyone on board so that we discuss. We mustn't go to the convention with a prescriptive outcome. We must go to the convention with the thorough scenarios that can emerge, and we must shepherd and pay attention to pay macro detail to the potential of each outcome, to the potential of each model, its pros, its cons. So before we have this convention, there must be serious work behind doors, not to create an influence and outcome, but to have scenarios informed by global experiences, by African experiences, and by our own experiences as Zimbabweans. And in the case of Zimbabwe, most of our experiences will come by what we have not done, what we have missed, and the fact that we have never had a matrix of listening to each other and coming together on each other. But there are potential outcomes. There are potential outcomes. Whatever outcome that is there are certain things that are clearly non-negotiable. One of them is that there must be consensus. So consensus must be a matrix that is recognized. It's impossible to make 15 million people agree. It's impossible to make a conference with 10,000 people agree, but you can do what the South Africans did in 1992, establish and operate on the doctrine of sufficient consensus. So the doctrine of sufficient consensus will be. So there are certain constituencies which we know we must respect. War veterans, for instance, the church, for instance, labor, for instance, women, for instance. So naturally, there will be a resting place of the key constituencies. And once the key constituencies agree, then it's sufficient consensus. A second principle is the self-hating ethos. No one must go there arrested and blinded by arrogance and hubris. No one must go there with the winner-take-all mindset, the scorched earth mindset. This is what I want. For the NTA to have a chance, there must be genuine give and take. And genuine give and take means there must be pain. There must be a point that you say, guys, I don't like this, I don't like this. If both camps don't have positions where they are in their private caucuses are saying we don't like this, but moving forward, you haven't started. Equally, if both camps don't say this is decent, this is okay, guys, this is what we wanted, you haven't begun. So we need to go back to basic principles of negotiating, which are anchored on genuine give and take. And this is where I see a problem with Zanu PF, because they've never been schooled in that ethos and in that synthesis. A third non-negotiable principle is that the NTA must be fundamentally different from a government of national unity. The NTA must be programmatic. In other words, it must be based on programs that need implementation. So if we say we need to sort out the mess on the land, then we need to agree those things that should be debated. Those things that need to be settling out right now. Some are now trying to privatize agricultural land acquired. Clearly, that is an issue that needs to be sorted out. There's another issue, the issue of rural areas not having any use value or exchange value. That is an issue that needs to be debated. There's the issue of farm laborers that were left hanging after the land reform program in 2000. There's the issue of multiple farm owners. There's the issue of compensation to farmers. There's the issue of multiple farm owners that are now back in Zimbabwe, particularly white people that are full in provinces like Marsh West and Marsh East and Marsh Central. That needs to be debated. We need to put a full stop on the land question. So taking land as a question, there must then be a program that this is what we are going to do. There must be a program on electoral reforms. There must be a program on the constitution. The constitution remains outstanding for a number of reasons. Number one, we agreed on a decent constitution in 2018, but time has shown that we didn't protect it enough. In two major amendments, Emerson Mnangagwa has made the original constitution unrecognizable from the amendments that he made. So from that point of view, the constitution needs to be revisited. The constitution needs to be revisited on the efficacy of first past the post. Is it serving us well? Or maybe we need to move to proportional representation. Do we need an executive president who becomes imperial and a god, or we need to go to proportional representation and a leader or a prime minister or a president chosen in parliament? What about terms of office? Is it enough to say the president must have 2 terms when members of parliament can serve for 100 years? All these things need to be put on the table. Another agenda that has to have a programmatic framework is the issue of corruption. This country is bleeding a minimum of US $3.5 billion a year. $3.5 billion a year, stolen directly from treasure. Stolen. There are individuals, there are permanent secretaries who are billionaires in Zimbabwe at the present moment. They've bought half of Cape Town at the present moment. There are individuals that are doling out vehicles as if vehicles are confetti. Those individuals must be investigated. There's a useless little company that was worth $300 million a few years ago. It's now being paid $1.9 billion for only 35% of its value. It's called Kuvimba. All those things must be investigated. What about the concessions that have been given out of Zimbabwe in lithium, in platinum, and so forth? All those things must be investigated. So the NTA is there to deliver. The NTA is there to deliver, and it can only deliver. It operates on the basis of a Gantt chart. A Gantt chart is a program. When I was in government, I used to have meetings at the beginning of the year around 16 or 17 January. And we used to write a book called What is to be done this year? Things to be done. That's what the NTA should do, things to be done. Finally, I've been thinking about this. You cannot bring the NTA without going to a referendum. You cannot bring the NTA without going to a referendum. Because remember, the NTA is going to alter parliament, is going to alter and suspend certain institutions in the constitution. So if you want the NTA to work, a referendum is inevitable because you collide with Section 328. And also, if you don't agree to go to a referendum, you then give legitimacy to those in the ED 2030 agenda who think that they can extend Emerson's term of office to 2030 without the need of a referendum. Lastly, Comrade Mandas, the NTA cannot work without regional and African guarantees. So whilst it's a totally and purely a Zimbabwean agenda and a Zimbabwean framework, we cannot do this without guarantees proffered and offered by SADC, whether we like it or not, by the African Union, whether we like it or not. Because we as citizens don't have the capacity and power to protect the integrity and survival of the NTA when hardliners come and attack it. So to prevent that, to make it by legitimacy, it has to think. I'm not worried about its duration. Seguribo, you're talking about 3 years or 5 years. What is key is, please create sufficient time for reforms. Please create sufficient time for reforms. So what should determine the duration of this process must be the time that you think that we can actually actualize the reforms. In conclusion, I want to say that we are in 2017. We are heading for another disaster. In January 2025, a National War hero Tim Chigudu was buried at the National Heroes Acres. 2 factions of Zanu PF were out singing each other and denigrating each other. That is the extent of the cockpit dissonance in this country, which can lead to an implosion in the form of a coup. We don't want any blood, any drop of blood to be shed because of power and insatiable a lust for power. The only way to prevent this is dialogue and the establishment of the National Transitional Authority. I thank you very much.